put on your seatbelt, as usual. When it comes to this guy, there's always a lot of astrology that illustrates the situation when something important is happening, such as is the case today, when he found himself in court facing Letitia James and a case that appears to have gone south in a major way because the judge already has decided that he is guilty, and the only thing to be determined is how much he'll have to pay. And so, predictably, you'll find difficult planetary situations in places that I've seen so many times with this guy. And there we begin with where the moon is and was earlier today, transiting through late Taurus, thereby squaring his Mars, and later today the ascendant. That seldom works out well, provided, of course, there are other aspects on the scene, as there are other aspects. Otherwise, the moon going through there would be a problem every single time, and it's not. But today, where it is, definitely not a good thing. And the moon being in Sagittarius at birth immediately connects it to the legal realm. And so then it's simply in a very public position, but in a square. Then the sun, in those degrees that we've seen so many times, the 8, 9, 10 degree Libra range over here, in between Jupiter and Neptune, that squares his Mercury and is in the general vicinity of his Neptune, Eris, Mercury T-square. But really it's the square to Mercury that is a problem as far as the position of the sun. And so there you are seeing the third sign, the sun is there. Third is where he basically messages and says things. It's the natural place of Gemini in a so-called natural chart with Aries rising. And so the third in any person's chart is their communication, and essentially the sun is highlighting what he's said in the past that now has him in hot water as a result of squaring the Mercury. These, of course, are quick-moving types of aspects, so on their own they wouldn't do very much other than a minor irritation, but it's when you put them together with other aspects that are going on in the chart, which I'll get to, but before that I'll mention Venus in here, in Leo, approaching the degrees of Mars, which again ordinarily would not be much of a problem, but in being in that area, it also squares the midheaven, and therefore it then does become a problem, and separately correlates with his rage and his petulance, and any connection to the idea of Mars as an angry energy, and Venus being nearby will tend to trigger that. But then we start to see the bigger picture here, which is Mars itself, which is a little slower moving, just enough to cause more problems. And there you see it also in Libra, but in those degrees, 22, 23, 24, 25, into all the way to at least 27, there you have it in direct square to a Saturn-Venus conjunction. And once you start squaring this area, it means you're hitting the 12th sign, which is a very difficult place for literally anybody, but especially him, in the sense that the 12th for him is pretty much all his hidden criminality that is now being brought into the foreground. So Mars squaring it takes up this whole period here. And then we see that Saturn is in early Pisces. First of all, Pisces is a sign that is unfriendly to his Gemini, Sagittarius placements, the Sun, Moon, because of the square. But more to the point, it's the direction this planet is taking as it goes toward November, because it's going to station near zero. And being near zero means that it's very near his descendant point, because his descendant point is practically almost at Pisces. And so it's essentially conjunct. Conjunct an angle means lots of Saturn on the scene. Lots of Saturn on the scene in the context of his life. Very bad news, because it's the energy of accountability being in his life at that time. Then we see in the November period Uranus here in degrees, where it's going to be in Taurus up here in it's called a sesqui square. It's like a square and a half to Neptune. That again is not helpful in any way. It's a irritating, challenging aspect, again to the same theme as before. His place of messaging, of talking literally, which is what he's getting called on right now, but also if you're irritating Neptune, you are indirectly but very palpably irritating the place it co-rules, which is over here in the 8th, which is what he's up for. Insurance, tax fraud, other people's money. That whole area is in this house, among other things. But that particular theme is very strong right now as a result of one of the trials. It's not the only trial, but it's a key trial at the moment. And if we look toward the Pluto transit, the fact that it's stationing October 11th means really the whole month is a stationary pattern because Pluto is moving really slowly, and that puts it opposite his Venus, which is really problematic. And this is where, when you hear Venus, think 12th sign, which is a complicated place for the planet to be, but his Venus rules his 10th, which is his career, his zenith, his MC. This is his public reputation. It's literally his place in the world, and it's being literally destroyed by the Pluto cycle at the moment. And of course, Eris, I've mentioned many times before, as a planet that moves glacially slow, and his whole life it's only traveled that far, but to his great detriment is in kind of permanently parked position square Venus, which again, very, very unfavorable because it puts it in that legal domain, and it is why you're seeing so many women prosecutors, women judges, basically calling him out and making things hard for him. And now, if you are looking for something good, in quotes, then you would point to the Neptune, which is in degrees of Pisces that trine his Venus. And this, I think, is the reason for his continued popularity with the MAGA base. And one wonders, as we go into next year, can this continue? And this is where, if we turn to the ephemeris for next year, we see that the Neptune continues in that type of aspect for a while. Really, I would want to move this back, or rather, a different way to do it would be to highlight the fact that already by spring, what is happening here is that you have to take into account in there that while Neptune continues to trine his Venus, which is a helpful aspect, and it's the kind of thing that helps your popularity. Neptune is very good at that. And so that's positive, but the pattern changes in the spring where Neptune moves further and further down. By the time it's in here, it's in a 150 aspect to his ascendant and is no longer helpful around popularity. It becomes way more complicated the deeper you get into 2024. And we know that in this range in here in the spring is when the trials are coming. The Smith trial is coming then, if not sooner, because that's one of the things Judge Chutkin has as an option in terms of implementing, because he continues to violate the guidelines around what he's saying, trying to incite violence and so forth. And she could put a gag order, she could even throw him in jail, but even more effective would be to move the trial date up. Point is, though, that no matter what, this part of the year here is extremely complicated because of where Neptune is, and then the evanescing popularity at that point, together with the Saturn station that is happening in the summer, which is square his sun and moon. Not exactly, but close enough, particularly being in a station, is definitely going to be operative. And then the Uranus energy here, all the way through into the end of the year, is squaring his Mars. This cannot be helpful. It's a very complicated aspect to be under, because even though some astrologers think that Uranus is helpful to this guy, I completely disagree. My experience of watching Uranus transits in his life, when they're challenging and he feels them. The Pluto here, I'm just showing the early degrees of Aquarius, brings up another half square and a half situation. Not that helpful. Even the Chiron gets in on the action, because in this area here, it is squaring his Saturn in the 12th from the legal house. And then, of course, Eris, the total write-off. This planet is just relentless in applying karma toward him for years and years and years. I could draw 25, 26, 27, 28. It continues to be in these degrees because it moves so slowly. Now, there is the potential counterpoint where you would say, well, yeah, but look, Jupiter will be going into his sign, and there's a point here in the summer where it moves through and trines his Jupiter. It does help. However, by the time it's into September, it also opposes his moon. And I've always thought with this guy that the only Jupiter cycle that helps him in a relatively clean way was when he got elected, when Jupiter was in Libra, returning to its original place, trining his sun and so forth. But any other place where Jupiter makes good aspects, such as was the case, for example, when it was in Aquarius and earlier and so forth, there's always a complicating element somewhere. Here, the complication is the opposition to the moon, which, for example, the moon, you would point to the fact that it's in his chart is in a place that is connected to elections and winning contests and so forth. So, bottom line, this is not a good situation. And when we look at October 16th, which is when the matter with Judge Chutkin is supposed to be addressed, I don't think that's going to go well, because you notice right at mid-month, the Sun is in degrees that square the Saturn and the Venus position here. In fact, October 16th is directly square. The Mars is entering degrees where it does a half square, because from early Scorpio, if you look over here, you count 28 degrees, and then what happens is 17 more makes 45. So then you know that this range here is doing a sesqui-square to Uranus from there, and then as it moves forward, it semi-squares the moon and sesqui-squares the sun. So this area here is quite irritated from where Mars is. The Sun, as I said, this position of Saturn, the Saturn position being so close to his descendant angle means the Saturn is really active at that point, and Saturn for him is never good news. There's an accountability pattern in there, and that's a definite no around that time. The Neptune is helpful, but I think the Neptune here has more to do with the fact that whatever comes down, at least for the time being, the MAGA people will continue to support him, perhaps even more at this stage. So that's not in question. That's something that helps him. But like I said, the Pluto station, drawn it in there, you can extend it. This is not a good period in terms of Pluto helping him, and of course the Eris. So my sense is that this mid-October event is not going to be a good thing for him. Not exactly sure what will happen, but I'm sure he's going to be unhappy with the result. And as far as next year, well, I've already covered it. Have no fear. As I've often said in quite a few prior videos, this does not get better. It gets worse. And like I end many videos with this guy, many of my videos, couldn't happen to a nicer guy.